Now, whenever we're talking about masks, we're usually trying to isolate one specific thing from everything else. Maybe I want to adjust only the background. Maybe I want to affect only a person's skin tones. Or apply an effect to a specific part of an image without changing everything else. And over the last few versions, Apple has been steadily refining how Final Cut approaches that problem. After the original shape and color masks, we got scene removal mask, then magnetic mask, which could intelligently track people, objects, and shapes. And now we have auto mask. Yet another Apple Silicon only feature, by the way. But instead of asking Final Cut to follow something I select, as we'll see, Auto Mask already knows what certain things are. So let's see how well that actually works. In usual Apple fashion, applying the Auto Mask filter, just like the other mask filters, can be done several ways depending on your preferred workflow. In this case, I want to do a quick sky replacement since this original sky is rather bland. In other words, I want to literally mask something out rather than isolate it. Let's start with the seemingly most obvious way. I can go into the Effects browser under Masks and Keying and drag the new Auto Mask filter onto my clip in the timeline. Or simply double-click it if the clip is already selected. This is exactly the same as going to the Enhancements menu with the little magic wand below the viewer and selecting Add Auto Mask. It's applied and nothing happens. Well, that's because just like the magnetic mask, I first need to tell Final Cut what it is I actually want to mask. And if we look at the bottom of the viewer, it tells us to move the pointer to reveal masks. Doing that gives the cursor a little green control point at the tip, which should already look familiar from the magnetic mask. And as I move it across the image, we can already see most of what the Auto Mask has recognized. I say most because once I click on the dog, for example, a pop-up window for the Auto Mask appears in the inspector. At the top, I can see how many semantic features it has found in the image, or rather the entire clip, and the dog is already selected in the list. Broader masks, such as foreground and background, can only be selected here in the inspector and not directly with the mouse in the viewer. Even before committing to a mask, I can skim through the clip to preview how well it holds up. Since, unlike the magnetic mask, this doesn't require any prior tracking or analysis pass, which is really nice. This same list can also be accessed via the little plus button at the top right of the viewer whenever the Auto Mask filter is selected, where I can once again select the dog mask, since no actual mask has been created yet. For that, I would need to click the Add Auto Mask button at the bottom if this was in fact the selection I wanted. But I can also add as many of the other recognized masks as I want simply by clicking on them. With each additional selection, that area is highlighted in the default red overlay, and I can also see the number of masks that will be created increase accordingly. And just so I can show you a few more options that require multiple masks, I'll also add the sky and the foliage masks as a second and third mask. And in this case, that's actually just the grass in the foreground, not the dirt in between or the field behind it, which I think is very cool and surprisingly precise. Now I can click Add 3 Auto Masks. The list closes, and now I have 3 separate masks listed under the Auto Mask filter, each with their respective type selected. But I can even go into the Type pop-up menu afterward and change any of them to another recognized object entirely if I want. This list also shows the entire breadth of what the Auto Mask is able to recognize, whether it has detected it in this particular clip or not. So we can see the largest section is for people, where I can select the entire person or even small details down to teeth or eyebrows. Selecting any of those here obviously wouldn't show any results since they don't exist in this particular clip. In the middle, we have scene-related options for things like sky and foliage, but I could also select the entire background or foreground, with the dog, for example, being considered the foreground in this case. And lastly, there's the animal section, which at this point only covers cats and dogs. And as we'll see in a second, it can in fact surprisingly reliably recognize either. So for now, if your project happens to involve cows, horses, or the occasional llama, I guess you'll still be reaching for the magnetic mask. With the filter itself selected, I'm shown the image with all masks applied, leaving me with everything but the mountain range, field, and dirt. Selecting any of the 3 individual masks in the list instead gives me the original image with the selected mask shown as an overlay in the chosen color. A color that I can, of course, change to anything I want. And naturally, I can also adjust the edge softness and expansion of each individual mask with the controls below as needed. If we look at the top right of the viewer, we'll also see 2 additional buttons for displaying masks. The first shows or hides an additional contour overlay should the color overlay alone not be enough. And with the second button, with the little stack icon, I can display all masks related to this filter instance in their respective colors, all at the same time. Very nice. I'll deactivate those again. But I really only want to mask out the sky, so I'll simply delete the other 2 masks from the list in the inspector. Now I see the sky perfectly masked by itself along the edge of the mountains. But this is obviously the opposite of what I want, since I want to replace the sky, not the ground. So I need to invert the mask, which I can do by clicking the menu to the right of the filter in the inspector and unchecking Invert at the bottom by selecting it. And with that, I've successfully masked out just the sky. Now all I need to do is enable the surprisingly fun and variable Final Cut cloud generator that I placed underneath the clip. And there you go. Looks surprisingly good, if you ask me. And you might notice that Final Cut recognized the dog's ball, understood that it was not part of the sky, and masked it out accordingly. Something that, in my quick and unscientific tests, neither the color mask nor magnetic mask did particularly reliably. So earlier I talked about correcting skin tones and how difficult it is to isolate them accurately with either a color mask or magnetic mask. And for colorists, skin tones are usually one of the most important parts of an image to get right, because unlike most colors in a shot, they have a very specific target range on a vector scope. But in order to get an accurate reading there in the first place, you first need to isolate the skin cleanly from everything else in the image. Now sure, there have always been workarounds. You can find countless tutorials showing combinations of color masks, crops, shape masks, and all sorts of other fairly tedious tricks to isolate skin more precisely. But AutoMask changes that dramatically. Say, for example, we wanted to do the opposite and colorize this black and white clip of a girl. That ups the ante considerably, since there are no skin tones to latch onto to begin with. I'll start out by opening the Filters browser and adding a Color Wheels filter, and go to the inspector. And here I can actually point out the first really useful workflow improvement, because up until now, adding a mask to any given effect, in this case a color correction, was honestly less than obvious. You had to know that floating the cursor over the effect name would reveal a small generic mask icon. Then you had to click that icon to get a list of the 3 mask types you could apply: shape, color, or, as of version 11, magnetic. With version 12.3, that has changed for the better. Now, we not only have 3 individual buttons for the different mask types, they are also permanently visible, so I no longer need to hover over the effect name just to reveal them. The first button applies a shape mask, the second applies a color mask, and the third is a combined button for the 2 masks that currently use machine learning: auto mask and magnetic mask. And just to prove my earlier point, a color mask obviously does absolutely nothing useful here since, well, there is no color. Trying to isolate just her face or hair with it is fairly futile since large parts of the rest of the image are always selected as well, even if I attempt to subtract areas using the Option key. So I'll delete that. A magnetic mask, on the other hand, would be great for selecting the girl as a whole, but not for isolating specific features. Because while the magnetic mask is trained to recognize people, objects, and shapes, it still sees them as complete objects. It doesn't actually know what skin specifically is, unlike the auto mask. So I'll delete that too, and now add the new auto mask. With that, I get the pop-up list once again, and this time it has found a full 10 separate masks. Again, all of this without any explicit tracking or analysis passed beforehand. As we can see, it recognized the girl as a whole, but also her hair, eyes, eyebrows, and more. Pretty amazing. And since I first want to add the skin color back into her face, I'll select Skin, even though somewhat counterintuitively, skin and face might initially seem like the more logical option. But if I choose that, we can see that everything in her face, including the eyes and lips, becomes part of the mask. And since I don't particularly want her looking jaundiced, I'll stick with just skin. And with that, we can see her facial skin perfectly isolated while excluding the eyes and lips. Now I simply click Add Auto Mask. With that, the mask is created, and I'll even rename the filter for easier identification later on. I'll double-click the name and enter Skin. Now I can jump back over to the Color Inspector and start making my adjustments. But before I do that, I obviously need to know what the correct color of skin even is. So I'll press Command 7 to open the scopes. Now I just need to make sure not only that the vector scope is selected, but also that the skin tone indicator is enabled from the menu above the window. This line shows exactly where proper skin tones lie, regardless of ethnicity. Now all I need to do is push the midtones toward the skin tone indicator, and then play with the shadows, highlights, and overall saturation until I find what I'm looking for, all while watching the vector scope to align the color values directly along the skin tone line. Easy, since this is currently the only color in the image, and therefore the only thing showing on the vector scope. Now I want to introduce a little more color into the image, and I think giving her blue hair could be fun, along with maybe some slightly healthier looking lips. So I'll go back to the color correction menu at the top and add another color wheels correction, because obviously I can't create 3 different colors with a single filter. And now instead of going through the same process of clicking the Add Auto Mask button and selecting the desired object in the viewer, I can simply go into the menu at the far right, and at the bottom there's now an Add Auto section where I can directly choose what I want to mask from everything the Auto Mask is able to recognize. In other words, as I mentioned before, this gives us a complete overview of everything it has been trained on, from people and skin to foliage and even cats and dogs. And since I already know it recognized her hair, I can simply select it directly from the menu. I'll rename this correction Hair, and now all I need to do is push the shadows into the blue. Last but not least, I'll create yet another color wheels correction. Name it Lips, and once again, go into the Add Auto menu and choose Lips. And again, I simply need to push the wheels into whatever shade of red, or frankly anything else I'm looking for. And there we go. If I go back to the video inspector and toggle the effects on and off, we can see quite the transformation, all without any kind of manual masking or tracking. And if I skim through the clip, we can even see that her hand is correctly recognized and masked as well as it enters the frame. And if I want to see the results entirely in real time, I can simply press Ctrl-R to render the clip. Okay, so how does this make correcting an image with actual color and skin tones exponentially easier than before? Well, if we take this clip with the 2 young ladies as an example, we can immediately see that the overall image is far too cool. That could be due to incorrect white balance or simply mixed lighting. So I want to correct the entire image based on the skin tones. And by the way, you might notice the flesh-colored pillow between the two. So if I tried doing this with a color mask, that pillow would also need additional masking along with various other elements in the image, as we can see here when I attempt to just select their faces. I'll delete that. Now, technically, I could apply a color wheels correction directly to the image and then add a skin auto mask to isolate only the skin tones. But then I would only be correcting the skin itself while the rest of the image would remain unchanged. And in some cases, that might actually be exactly what you want. But here, I want to correct the entire image, using their skin tones as the reference. So instead, I'll first apply an auto mask by itself and add a skin mask to mask out anything but their skin. Then I'll apply a color wheels correction. That way, when I look at the scopes, all I'm seeing are the values for the isolated skin in the image. And as we can see when referencing the skin tone indicator, the values are, in fact, shifted too far toward magenta and blue. So now I can simply drag the midtones toward the opposite direction, in other words, toward yellowish red, until the scope values line up perfectly along the skin tone indicator. And now all I need to do is either disable or even completely delete the auto mask effect itself. Because in this case, the mask was really only there to isolate the skin for measurement purposes. By removing all the other colors from the scopes, I could accurately align the skin tones first. Once that's done, I can simply remove the mask and let the same color wheels correction flow through to the entire image. Now when I toggle the correction on and off, we can see the massive improvement. And if the background becoming warmer bothers me, I can simply add yet another color wheels correction, and this time apply a background auto mask to it. Now I can quickly and easily adjust the rest of the image independently without affecting my now correctly balanced skin tones. Very easy, very cool. And here's one more great skin-related use case that I see people asking about quite a bit, what I like to jokingly call the poor man's skin softener. Here I've applied a simple blur filter and added a skin auto mask to constrain the effect to her skin. The result is already surprisingly good, but you can see that the auto mask also picked up parts of the black feather near her face that I don't really want softened. So I added a magnetic mask to the feather and set it to Subtract to refine the selection even further. And honestly, this is a really good example of how Apple's current masking tools work together. The auto mask gets me most of the way there instantly, and then I can use a magnetic mask to quickly refine the few areas it didn't quite get right. Now all I need to do is increase or decrease the amount of blur until I get the amount of skin softening that I'm looking for. And if I wanted to take it even further, I could always stack additional filters on top to refine the look. And just to show you a quick example of another way to use the auto mask that doesn't involve color correction, but rather effects. Remember that any and all masks can also be used together with effects as well. Here I used both an auto mask and a shape mask to create a quick and easy censor effect. I added a pixelate filter to this clip and applied a skin and face auto mask to it. And to keep it from pixelating too much of the hands in the lower section of the image and the man's legs on the right, I added a simple shape mask on top of that and set it to Subtract. This would be a great way of censoring an entire crowd of people with just a few clicks, instead of manually tracking the effect onto every individual face. Or, if you wanted to do something a little more goofy, here is the same clip where I used an eye auto mask. Then I expanded and blurred the mask slightly, inverted the mask, and then placed this blobs generator underneath for a slightly, shall we say, satanic effect. Lastly, just to prove that it is in fact extremely good at differentiating between the currently only two animals it has been trained to recognize, namely cats and dogs, here is a clip containing both. And when I apply the auto mask, we can see that it correctly identifies all three dogs as well as the one cat individually. Very cool, even if there is flutter in the mask here and there. But you could quickly and easily compensate for that with an additional magnetic mask, for example. And funny enough, switching it to foliage even revealed a plant and a bunch of grass in the background that I genuinely hadn't even noticed before. The alternate medium shot, on the other hand, holds up much better, even when the one dog passes behind the other. So there you go. That's the all-new and extremely useful auto mask. No analysis passes, no manual tracking, no endless refining masks frame by frame, just immediate semantic masking directly inside Final Cut. And once again, instead of trying to use AI to edit for you, Apple seems much more interested in using it to make complex tasks practical. Not because they were impossible before, but because most of us simply wouldn't have spent the time doing them for mediocre results. And personally, I think that's the much smarter direction. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences with it down in the comments. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate your support. If you haven't seen my tutorial covering the new subtitles or my equally comprehensive tutorial on the magnetic mask, you can find them both over here. And while you're at it, if you feel like hitting this subscribe button over here or down below, that would be greatly appreciated. Thanks again, and see you in the next one.